Quirks and myths of NEC3. NEC3 is by its nature a little different. It set out to address specific problems within the industry, so a new approach was an inherent part of changing the status quo. In this session we explore some of the myths and quirks around NEC3. So when it's said NEC3 requires more resources, or that your workload is greater under NEC3, are they right? And what do they mean by this? NEC3 does require a proactive approach to project management. Whether this means more effort depends a little on where you're starting from. It does generally require more effort up front and when issues arise. NEC3's procedures require punctuality from both sides to aid successful delivery, so that issues are addressed when they occur, rather than at the end of the project. But this affects the timing of workload more than the volume of it. NEC3 does, however, also require you to document this proactive approach, by raising early warnings, for example. A good project manager would previously have picked up the phone to flag up an issue. NEC3 requires that this is also written down, so in this respect it does require slightly more effort. Overall, however, workload is broadly the same as with other contracts, particularly for managers who are proactive and good at record keeping. But for those who are not, NEC3 is likely to be a cultural change more than just a change of contract. It's been said by some detractors that NEC3 is contractor friendly. NEC3 set out to be a neutral contract, but it is perhaps the object of flexibility that gives rise to these comments. NEC3's approach to flexibility means that some of the standard liabilities that are included in other terms and conditions by default have a new home in the form of the works information. This gives employers more flexibility to choose which constraints and risks are included in the contract and allocated to each party. The flip side of this is that it places more emphasis on the employer to draft a good works information, as any flaws in it could result in a compensation event. NEC3's simplistic language is quoted by some as a key benefit, but by others as a weakness. You won't need to read a 200-word sentence twice to grasp its meaning in NEC3, unlike most other contracts. That's because you simply won't find a 200-word sentence in NEC3. This approach has exasperated some legal professionals, with one solicitor describing it as a triumph of form over substance, and others concerned about the lack of case law to aid interpretation. It seems that the simple language works for pragmatic project teams, but has flummoxed experts and those who prefer a more conservative approach. Is it better to have 12 legal cases to help interpret a single clause in JCT, or perhaps not enough case law in NEC3? You will have to decide this for yourselves. These topics have divided opinions, and this module is intended to provide only an insight into some of the more complex aspects of NEC3. Other areas that fall outside the scope of this module but merit further discussion in more advanced training include how NEC3 addresses health and safety matters, force majeure, intellectual property, and its approach to payments through the schedule of cost components.